Have you ever had that feeling? That gut feeling that tells you one thing, but all the official science says something else? Or maybe it says nothing at all. Well, that's the tension we're diving into today. That fascinating and sometimes frustrating clash between our own personal experience and formal scientific proof. Let's break it down.
So let's just start with the core dilemma here. Let's say you're experiencing something new. Maybe it's a side effect from some new gadget or a product everyone's using. You feel it. You see the effects in your own life. But when you go looking for studies or some kind of official confirmation, poof, there's nothing. So what do you do then?
This whole conflict really boils down to two completely different ways of understanding the world. Our lived experience, well, it's instant. It's personal. It's that canary in the coal mine feeling that something's up. But scientific proof? It's literally built to be the opposite. It is slow by design because it has to be systematic, it has to be verified, and eventually conclusive. They're just operating on totally different timelines, and that's where all the friction starts.
And look, this isn't just some modern-day problem. The source material we're looking at argues that if you just look back through history, you can see this really clear repeating pattern where people's personal experiences were way ahead of the formal evidence.
Seriously, think about it for a second. Time and time again, things that were once considered totally normal, or even healthy, were eventually shown to be incredibly dangerous. And those very first warnings, they didn't come from a sterile lab. Nope, they came from the people who are actually living through the consequences.
This pattern just shows up over and over. You've got the 1920s with young women using cosmetics laced with radium and suffering these horrific effects long before the stuff was banned. Or the 40s, when doctors were literally prescribing cigarettes while smokers themselves were making that grim connection to cancer. Lobotomies were treated like a miracle cure, but it was the devastating personal stories that were the first real sign that something was terribly wrong. Heck, even heroin was sold as a simple cough medicine, decades before science finally caught up to the reality of addiction.
And that really gets to the heart of it all. Science has to lag behind lived experience. That's its strength, right? It's slow, it's methodical, it needs to gather data, verify results, and build an absolutely solid case. But what that means is that it will almost always be trailing the immediate real-world experiences of people on the ground.
So here's the crucial question then. If this exact pattern played out with radium and tobacco and heroin, could it be happening right now with something new?
Well, the source we're exploring today argues that yes, this historical pattern is absolutely repeating itself right now. And it puts forward a modern case study, internet pornography. The whole claim is that we are living in that exact same familiar gap between widespread personal accounts and the conclusive, formal scientific proof.
So, what do these modern lived experiences look like? Well, the source points to this growing number of people, millions of them, who are self-reporting negative effects that they personally believe are tied to their consumption, things like increased social anxiety and other troubling mental and physical issues. This is the anecdotal evidence that the author thinks is sounding the alarm today.
And these experiences aren't just happening in a vacuum. They're being shared, big time, in online communities like NoFap and Porn Free. The source points to these forums as basically the modern version of those first smokers comparing notes, They're creating this massive crowdsourced library of anecdotal data that's way out ahead of any formal studies.
Okay, so this all brings us to a really personal question. The source doesn't frame this as a settled debate. Instead, it presents it as a choice that each person has to make for themselves, right now.
So when you find yourself stuck in this gap, between what people are experiencing on the ground and what science has officially proven, the author suggests there are really only two paths you can take.
All right, so option one is to basically become your own scientist. Trust your body, trust your own lived experience. You can experiment for yourself and make a decision based on your own results and how you feel. Option two is to wait. You can just hold off, don't make a decision, until the scientific community has done its thing, completed all its rigorous long-term studies, and reached an official consensus.
But, and this is a big but, the source offers a pretty clear warning about choosing to wait. The argument is that definitive final proof could take decades to arrive, and by the time it does, the window for you to take personal action might have already closed. It's a really stark way of framing the potential cost of just doing nothing.
So, at the end of the day, this whole thing isn't about getting one final answer. It's about recognizing that you, right now, are standing in that gap between anecdotal reports and scientific consensus. It's really a call to weigh all the evidence for yourself and decide what kind of proof you actually need to make a change. And all of this leaves us with one last, really provocative question that goes so far beyond any single topic. When does a personal truth, or a collection of thousands of personal truths, finally cross that line and become a public fact? That's something to think about.